Princess Anne's been working incredibly hard to save the children from, and I'm her biggest fan, because what she crowns into a day I could never achieve. And we've always hit it off very well, and I just think she's marvellous.
They laughed at him, called him a liar, but Charles Spencer knew the horrifying truth about what they did to Princess Diana. For decades, he begged people to listen, to see what was really happening behind closed doors. Everyone ignored him. Until the day they found her diary. What was written inside those pages made the royal family panic.
I did go to Diana's coffin the day after I'd written it, and I read it to her in there, and I did sort of feel
The secrets Diana kept, the names she wrote down, the final entry before her death. It exposed everything. What you're about to discover will make you question everything you thought you knew. This changes everything. On September the 6th, 1997, the world watched as one of the most memorable and heartbreaking funerals in modern history took place in London. An estimated 2.5 billion people tuned in from across the globe, while hundreds of thousands more lined the streets of the British capital. The funeral of Princess Diana became a moment that seemed to freeze time, bringing together people from all walks of life in collective grief. Among the many powerful images from that day, one in particular has remained etched in public memory. Two young boys, Prince William and Prince Harry, walked behind their mother's coffin through the streets of London. William was 15 years old at the time, and Harry had just turned 12. The sight of these children dressed in black, their faces pale and expressionless, moving slowly through crowds of weeping mourners, struck people as almost unbearably sad. The procession moved from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey, a journey that took the young princes past thousands of people who had come to pay their respects. Many in the crowd were crying openly, holding flowers and photographs of Diana. The atmosphere was thick with emotion, yet the two boys maintained their composure throughout the entire walk. They kept their eyes mostly downward, never breaking down despite the overwhelming circumstances. Walking alongside them were their father, Prince Charles, their grandfather, Prince Philip, and their uncle, Charles Spencer. For Spencer, Diana's younger brother, this walk was particularly difficult. Years later, it would be revealed that he had fought hard against the decision to have the boys participate in this public procession at all. According to multiple accounts, including Spencer's own statements in later interviews, he had been discussing the funeral arrangements with officials from Buckingham Palace when the plan was mentioned to him. The idea that William and Harry would walk behind their mother's coffin, in full view of the world's media, immediately struck him as wrong. His response was reportedly immediate and firm. He refused to accept it. Spencer argued that Diana would never have wanted her sons exposed to such a situation. He felt strongly that asking children, particularly ones so young and dealing with fresh grief, to march through the streets while cameras captured their every movement was unnecessary and cruel. The whole concept seemed unnatural to him. These were boys who had just lost their mother in traumatic circumstances, and now they were being asked to perform what essentially amounted to a public duty. The discussions between Spencer and palace officials became tense. He pushed back against the plan repeatedly, making his objections clear. But according to his later recollections, the response from the palace was straightforward and unwavering. He was told that the decision had already been made. The matter, from their perspective, was settled. Spencer continued to argue his case. He pointed out the emotional toll this would take on the children, the invasiveness of having cameras zooming in on their grief, and the fact that this kind of public display went against basic instincts about protecting children in distress. However, his protests seemed to make little difference to those making the decisions. Then something happened that changed Spencer's position entirely. At some point during these discussions, he was told that William and Harry actually wanted to participate in the walk. They wanted to be there, walking behind their mother's coffin. This information completely altered Spencer's perspective on the situation. If the boys themselves had expressed a desire to do this, then Spencer felt he had no right to interfere. He didn't want to override their wishes or make decisions for them that went against what they wanted. Despite his personal reservations about the appropriateness of the plan, he backed down. He would walk with them, support them, but he would not continue fighting against something they had apparently chosen for themselves. The funeral proceeded as planned. The procession was long and emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. The boys maintained remarkable composure throughout, never showing visible signs of breaking down, though the strain was evident on their faces. The world praised them for their dignity and bravery, seeing in them a strength that seemed almost beyond their years. However, the truth about that decision would not emerge fully until many years later. Prince Harry eventually spoke publicly about the experience in various interviews, and his account revealed something that Spencer had not known at the time. The boys had never been given a choice at all. They had simply been told what was going to happen, and as children with no power to refuse, they had complied. Harry described feeling that he had to do it, that there was no alternative presented to them. At 12 years old, he was in no position to argue with the adults making decisions around him. The walk itself, he later said, felt strange and disconnected, as though he was somehow removed from the experience even while going through it. He described feeling numb, his emotions shut down in a way that allowed him to physically complete the walk without falling apart. When Spencer learned the truth years after the funeral, he realized he had been misled. The information that had caused him to drop his objections had not been accurate. The boys had not asked to walk behind their mother's coffin. They had been told to do it, and they had obeyed. Spencer had unknowingly stepped aside for something he would never have permitted if he had known the real circumstances. This revelation added another layer of pain to an already tragic situation. Spencer had been the one person in a position to potentially protect his nephews from this ordeal, and he had been the one voice inside the family structure raising concerns about the plan. His objections had been based on legitimate worries about the psychological impact on children being forced to grieve publicly, but by being told the boys wanted to participate, his opposition had been neutralized. The funeral walk has remained a subject of discussion and debate ever since. Many child welfare experts have commented over the years that by modern standards, such a situation would likely not be permitted. The understanding of childhood, trauma and the protection of children from public scrutiny has evolved significantly since 1997. Prince Harry himself later stated that in today's world, something like that would not be allowed to happen. For the young princes, the experience became a defining moment of their childhood. It was broadcast around the world, becoming an image that would follow them throughout their lives. Every photograph, every video clip from that day captured them at one of the most vulnerable moments any child could experience. And unlike most children who lose a parent, they have no privacy in which to process their grief. The morning of the funeral was heavy with more than just sorrow. There was a sense of shock that still hung over the city. Diana's death had been so sudden, so unexpected that many people were still struggling to accept it as real. The streets of London had transformed into impromptu memorials, with flowers piled several feet deep in places, along with handwritten notes, photographs and tributes from people who felt a personal connection to the princess. As William and Harry walked through these streets, past these displays of public grief, they were surrounded by the sound of people sobbing. The crowd's emotion was palpable, creating an atmosphere that must have been overwhelming for two boys trying to hold themselves together. Yet they never faltered, never broke stride, maintaining the composure expected of them despite their age and circumstances. Charles Spencer walked beside them, supporting them as best he could, though he later admitted that the entire experience was one of the most painful of his life. He watched his nephews go through something he had tried to prevent, knowing there was nothing more he could do at that moment except be present. The walk seemed to last forever, each step measured and slow, the eyes of the world recording every moment. When Charles Spencer stood up to deliver his eulogy at Westminster Abbey, no one in the congregation knew exactly what he would say. The setting was formal and traditional, filled with members of the royal family, world leaders, celebrities, and dignitaries. Funerals within this context typically followed strict protocols, with speeches that were measured, respectful, and carefully restrained. What Spencer delivered instead became one of the most direct and powerful addresses ever heard at a royal funeral. Spencer did not simply speak about his sister. He spoke for her. His words cut through the formality of the occasion with a clarity and honesty that caught many people off guard. He described Diana as the most hunted person of the modern age, a phrase that immediately drew attention to the relentless media pursuit she had endured throughout her adult life. This was not subtle language. It was a direct accusation, pointing fingers at the press photographers and tabloid journalists who had made her life increasingly difficult. but his criticism went deeper than the media. Alone, while Spencer never explicitly named the royal family in his condemnation, the implications of his words were clear to those listening. He spoke about Diana's treatment, about the lack of protection she had received, and about the system that had failed to keep her safe. The royal family sat in the front rows of the Abbey, listening as Spencer delivered words that many interpreted as aimed directly at them. The Queen remained completely still throughout the speech, her face showing no emotion. Prince Charles similarly displayed no visible reaction, maintaining the composed exterior expected of him. Other members of the royal family were equally impassive. But outside the immediate royal circle, people were reacting very differently. Spencer's words were resonating with a public that had spent the past week questioning why Diana had been left so vulnerable. Then came the moment that would dominate newspaper headlines for days afterward. Spencer made a promise, speaking directly about William and Harry. He stated that Diana's blood family, the Spencers, would do everything possible to continue the work Diana had begun with her sons. He promised that they would ensure the boys were guided with imagination and love, and that they would be protected from the same fate their mother had suffered. The language he used was significant. By emphasizing the blood family, he was drawing a distinction between the Spencers and the Windsors. He was making it clear that Diana's side of the family saw themselves as having a role in the boys' upbringing, not just the royal institution. Many people interpreted this as a direct challenge to the royal family's authority over William and Harry. It suggested that Spencer believed the Windsors alone could not be trusted to raise the boys properly, that they needed the Spencer family's involvement to ensure Diana's influence remained strong in their lives. The response to this promise was something rarely witnessed at any funeral, let alone a royal one. The congregation inside Westminster Abbey began to applaud. It started as a few scattered claps, but quickly grew into sustained applause that filled the ancient church. Dignitaries, celebrities, politicians, and members of the public who had been given seats inside the Abbey were all joining in. The sound of clapping echoed off the stone walls, creating a moment that was both powerful and deeply unusual. Applause at funerals is generally considered inappropriate in British culture, particularly at formal events like this one. Yet, in that moment, the traditional rules seemed to fall away. People were responding to Spencer's words with genuine emotion, showing their agreement with what he was saying. Outside the Abbey, where crowds were listening to the service on loudspeakers, the applause was even louder. The streets of London erupted in clapping and cheering, a spontaneous outpouring that demonstrated just how strongly Spencer's message had connected with ordinary people. Inside the Abbey, however, the royal family did not join in the applause. They remained silent and still, neither endorsing nor openly rejecting what Spencer had said. Their lack of response was itself a response, showing the deep discomfort his words had caused. This was a direct confrontation, played out in front of billions of viewers, and there was no way to avoid or minimize it. Spencer's speech was broadcast around the world, and its impact was immediate. News organizations replayed his words repeatedly, analyzing every phrase and implication. Many commentators praised him for saying what needed to be said, for being the one person willing to speak uncomfortable truths at such a public moment. Others felt he had crossed a line, that a funeral was not the appropriate place for what amounted to accusations and political statements. But as powerful as Spencer's promise was, the reality of keeping it would prove far more complicated than anyone might have imagined. In the years following Diana's death, Spencer would come to admit that his promise had been essentially impossible to fulfill. William and Harry were not ordinary children who could simply be taken in by relatives. They were members of the royal family, second and third in line to the British throne at the time. Their lives were already mapped out by the institution they were born into. Spencer had no legal authority to remove them from royal control or to personally raise them as Diana might have wished. The monarchy's structures and protocols dictated how the princes would be raised, educated, and prepared for their future roles. While the Spencer family could certainly maintain relationships with the boys and provide support, they could not fundamentally change the course of their upbringing in the way Spencer's speech had seemed to suggest. This realization was difficult for Spencer to accept. He had stood in front of the world and made a solemn promise, speaking from genuine conviction and love for his nephews. But the practical realities of their situation meant that promise could never fully come true. The boys would remain firmly within the royal system, subject to its rules and expectations, regardless of what their uncle had declared. Years later, when reflecting on that promise and his speech, Spencer acknowledged these limitations. He admitted that while his intentions had been sincere, he had perhaps spoken more from emotion than from a realistic assessment of what was actually possible. The royal family's control over William and Harry was absolute in practical terms, and no speech, no matter how powerful or well-intentioned, could change that fundamental fact. Yet before the funeral, before the speech, and before any of these public moments, there had been the night that started everything. To understand the full weight of what Spencer felt that day in the Abbey, we need to go back to where this tragedy began, to the early hours of August 31st, 1997. Charles Spencer was in South Africa at the time, far from London and even further from Paris. He was asleep when the first phone call came through. The voice on the other end of the line was controlled but urgent. There had been an accident in Paris. Diana had been in a car crash. She was seriously injured and had been taken to a hospital. The details were limited, but the situation was clearly grave. Spencer sat up, immediately awake, his mind racing through possibilities and fears. He knew how aggressively the paparazzi pursued his sister. He had seen firsthand how they chased her car, how they surrounded her whenever she appeared in public, how they made normal life nearly impossible for her. Had they finally pushed things too far? Had their relentless pursuit caused this accident? He waited for more information, each minute feeling impossibly long. The first call had given him hope that she might survive, that perhaps the injuries, while serious, could be treated. He held on to that hope as he waited by the phone, willing it to ring again with better news. When the second call came, the voice was different. It was colder, more formal, carrying the weight of finality. The caller got straight to the point. Diana had not made it. She had died from her injuries. Princess Diana was gone. The words seemed impossible to process. His sister, who had been so full of life, who had survived so much already, who had been working to build a new chapter for herself, was dead. And it had happened in exactly the way everyone who knew her had feared it might. She had been running from photographers, trying to escape the cameras that had haunted her for 16 years, and that escape had ended in a tunnel in Paris. Spencer's immediate reaction was anger. He knew precisely who to blame. The paparazzi who had been chasing Diana's car that night were responsible in his mind. They had been pursuing her for a photograph, for a story, for money, and their pursuit had contributed to the crash that killed her. This was not just a tragic accident. This was the inevitable result of years of harassment and exploitation. But there was no time to sit with that anger or to process his grief. Within hours, the news would break publicly. The world would soon know what had happened, and everything would change. The media storm that was about to descend would be unlike anything anyone had seen before, and Spencer would find himself at the center of it, trying to protect his sister's memory while dealing with his own devastating loss. When the news of Diana's death was officially confirmed, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Television broadcasts were interrupted with breaking news bulletins. Radio stations stopped their regular programming. Within minutes, the announcement had spread across the globe, and people everywhere responded with shock and disbelief. Many simply could not accept that Princess Diana, someone who had seemed so vibrant and alive just hours before, was actually gone. In London, people began gathering outside the places associated with Diana almost immediately. Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace became focal points for public grief. People arrived carrying flowers, many of them still in shock, tears streaming down their faces. They came in small groups at first, but within hours the crowds had grown substantially. By morning, both locations were surrounded by mourners. The flowers began to pile up in extraordinary numbers. Bouquets were laid carefully on the ground, one after another, until they formed carpets several feet deep. People brought not just flowers, but also handwritten notes, photographs of Diana, stuffed animals, and candles. The messages on the cards expressed personal connections that people felt with the princess, even though most had never met her. She had touched their lives in some way, and now they needed to express their grief. The scenes were remarkable in their intensity. Grown men stood openly weeping. Women clutched each other for support. Children who were too young to fully understand what had happened could sense the gravity of the moment from the adults around them. This was not just mourning. This was collective heartbreak on a scale that Britain had rarely witnessed. But as the public poured out their grief, something strange was happening at the highest levels of British society. The royal family remained completely silent. There was no immediate statement from Buckingham Palace. No message of condolence was issued. The Queen, Prince Charles, and the rest of the royal family were at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, their traditional summer residence, and they showed no signs of returning to London or addressing the nation. At first, people assumed the family needed time to process the shock. After all, this was a deeply personal loss for them as well. Prince Charles had lost his ex-wife and the mother of his children. The Queen had lost a former daughter-in-law. William and Harry had lost their mother. It seemed reasonable that they might need a few hours to collect themselves before making any public statements. But the hours turned into a full day, and still there was silence. No member of the royal family appeared in public. No spokesperson addressed the growing crowds in London. The palace seemed to be operating as though nothing had happened, maintaining its usual distance and formality even in the face of a national crisis. As another day passed, the public mood began to shift from grief to confusion and then to anger. People started asking questions. Why was there no statement? Why had the Queen not addressed the nation? Why was the royal family staying hidden in Scotland while the rest of the country was in mourning? Most troubling of all to many people, why was the flag at Buckingham Palace not flying at half-mast? The flag issue became a symbol of everything that seemed wrong with the royal family's response. By British tradition, the flag over Buckingham Palace only flies when the Queen is in residence, and it never flies at half-mast because the monarch is seen as a permanent institution. When the Queen is not there, no flag flies at all. Since the Queen was in Scotland, there was no flag over the palace. But to the public gathered outside, this felt like a glaring absence. The most famous woman in Britain had died, and there was no visible sign of mourning from the institution she had been part of. The newspapers, which typically treated the monarchy with respect and deference, began turning against them. Headlines became increasingly critical, questioning the royal family's judgment and their connection to ordinary people. One newspaper ran a headline asking where the Queen was and demanding that she show the nation she cared. Others were even more direct, accusing the royal family of cold indifference at a time when leadership and compassion were desperately needed. The criticism grew stronger with each passing day. People felt abandoned by the institution that was supposed to represent them. The contrast between the public's raw emotion and the royal family's apparent lack of response created a divide that seemed to widen by the hour. This was Diana, the people's princess, the woman who had connected with ordinary citizens in ways no other royal had managed. And yet the monarchy seemed unable or unwilling to acknowledge what her death meant to the nation. While all of this was happening in public, William and Harry were isolated at Balmoral, trying to cope with the most devastating news of their young lives. Prince Charles had the terrible task of telling his sons that their mother had died. The conversation was private, but in later interviews, Harry described the confusion and disbelief he felt. He kept asking the same questions over and over, struggling to accept that his mother was not coming back. The boys had last spoken to Diana by phone just the day before the crash. It had been an ordinary call, the kind of quick conversation that happens all the time between parents and children. They had probably said they would talk later, made casual plans, and ended the call without any sense that it would be the last time they would ever hear her voice. That realization, when it came, must have been crushing. There were so many things left unsaid, so many moments they would never have. In those first few days at Balmoral, William and Harry were kept away from the public eye. They were surrounded by family, but as Harry would later reveal, the atmosphere was not one of open emotional support. The royal family was not known for displaying feelings or discussing personal pain. There was a culture of maintaining composure and carrying on, even in the face of tragedy. For two grieving boys who desperately needed comfort and reassurance, this environment may have felt cold and isolating. Harry later described feeling utterly confused during this time. Outside, the whole world seemed to be crying for his mother. Millions of people were expressing their grief openly, sharing their pain and supporting each other. But inside Balmoral, there was mostly silence. No one talked about Diana in the way the boys needed. No one provided the kind of emotional comfort that children require when they lose a parent. The stiff upper lip that the royal family prided itself on seemed completely inadequate for the situation. As the days passed and the royal family remained in Scotland, the pressure on them to respond grew intense. The British public was not accustomed to criticising the monarchy so openly, but Diana's death had changed something fundamental. People felt that the institution had let her down in life, and now it was letting her down in death as well. The silence from Balmoral was being interpreted as a lack of care, a failure to understand what Diana had meant to the nation. Politicians began quietly suggesting that the Queen needed to address the country. Media commentators openly questioned whether the monarchy understood how serious the situation had become. There was talk that the royal family was out of touch, that they had lost connection with the people they were meant to serve. Some even suggested that the institution itself might be at risk if it could not find a way to respond appropriately to this moment. Finally, on September the 5th, 5 full days after Diana's death, the Queen returned to London and agreed to make a televised address. The decision came after what was reportedly significant pressure from advisors who recognised that the monarchy's reputation was being seriously damaged. The delay in responding had already cost them considerable public goodwill, and they needed to act quickly to repair the damage. The Queen's speech was broadcast on television that evening. She spoke from one of the staterooms at Buckingham Palace, addressing the camera directly. She called Diana an exceptional and gifted human being, praised her devotion to William and Harry, and said she admired and respected Diana for her energy and commitment to helping others. The Queen acknowledged that the nation was grieving and said that she spoke for the entire royal family in expressing their sorrow. For many people, the speech provided some of the acknowledgement they had been looking for. The Queen's words were measured and respectful, recognizing Diana's impact and the nation's loss. But for others, the speech came too late. 5 days was too long to wait. The damage had already been done. People had seen the royal family's first instinct, which was to retreat and maintain distance rather than to engage with the public's emotion. The flag at Buckingham Palace was lowered to half-mast for the first time in history, a break with tradition that acknowledged the exceptional circumstances. But even this gesture felt like something that had been forced upon the monarchy rather than something they had chosen to do willingly. The public had demanded visible signs of mourning, and the royal family had eventually complied, but the delay in doing so had revealed something troubling about the institution. The days between Diana's death and her funeral exposed a fundamental disconnect between the monarchy and the people. Diana had built her public image on accessibility, warmth, and genuine connection with ordinary citizens. She had broken royal protocols to hug people with AIDS, to sit on the ground with landmine victims, to show real emotion in public. The royal family, by contrast, had responded to her death with formality, distance, and an apparent inability to express or even acknowledge emotion. This contrast was not new. People had seen it throughout Diana's marriage and divorce. But never before had it been so stark or so consequential. The royal family's handling of those first days after Diana's death became a defining moment in their modern history, one that raised serious questions about whether the institution could adapt to changing times and public expectations. Charles Spencer's criticism of the royal family did not end with Diana's funeral. In the years that followed, he continued to speak publicly about what he saw as systemic failures that had cost his sister her life. His anger was not just about the events of one tragic night in Paris. It was about years of mistreatment, neglect, and a fundamental lack of protection that he believed the royal institution should have provided, but never did. In various interviews over the years, Spencer repeatedly made clear his view that Diana had never been truly accepted by the royal family. She had entered their world as a 19-year-old woman, young and full of hope about her future. The transformation from Lady Diana Spencer to the Princess of Wales had seemed like a fairy tale to the outside world. But according to her brother, the reality behind palace walls was far darker than anyone knew. Spencer described how Diana was thrown into a rigid system that expected her to simply adapt and conform. She was supposed to smile for the cameras, follow protocols she barely understood, and ignore her own emotional needs. When her marriage to Prince Charles began to deteriorate, Spencer said she found herself increasingly isolated. Rather than receiving support or understanding, she was pushed further to the margins of royal life. The divorce in 1996 made Diana's position even more precarious. She was no longer officially part of the royal family, yet she remained one of the most photographed and followed women in the world. She was still the mother of a future king, still deeply involved in charitable work, and still commanded enormous public affection. But according to Spencer, the royal family distanced themselves from her at precisely the moment when she needed protection most. Spencer was particularly angry about the lack of security Diana received after her divorce. He pointed out in multiple interviews that the royal family knew perfectly well how aggressively the media pursued her. They knew she was being followed constantly, that photographers camped outside her home, that she could barely move in public without being swarmed. Yet instead of ensuring she had adequate protection, they seemed content to let her deal with it alone. This abandonment, as Spencer saw it, was not just neglectful, but dangerous. Diana was being hunted by paparazzi, who would do almost anything for a photograph. She was constantly trying to escape, constantly looking over her shoulder, constantly stressed by the pursuit. And on August 31st, 1997, that constant running finally ended in disaster. Spencer believed that tragedy could have been prevented if the royal institution had taken its responsibility to protect her seriously. In one particularly pointed interview, Spencer stated that Diana had been the most hunted person of the modern age. He emphasized that this was not an exaggeration or dramatic language. It was a literal description of her daily existence. She could not go anywhere without being followed. She could not have private moments. Every aspect of her life was documented, analyzed, and sold to the public. And through it all, she faced this onslaught essentially alone. Spencer also spoke about conversations he had with Diana in the years before her death. She had called him multiple times in deep distress, he revealed, telling him how lonely and trapped she felt. She described feeling like no one in the royal family was listening to her concerns or taking her situation seriously. She was crying out for help, and Spencer felt that those cries were ignored by the very institution that should have been supporting her. But Spencer's criticism went beyond just the lack of security. He believed there were people within the palace system who actively wanted Diana to be diminished. Her popularity had become a problem for the royal family. She was so beloved by the public that she overshadowed other royals, including Prince Kingcharles. Her natural warmth and ability to connect with ordinary people made the rest of the family seem cold and distant by comparison. According to Spencer, some within the institution saw her as a threat rather than an asset. This view suggested something more sinister than simple neglect. Spencer was implying that Diana's difficulties were not just the result of an uncaring system, but of deliberate actions by people who wanted to see her fail. Whether or not this was true, it reflected Spencer's deep conviction that his sister had been badly mistreated by an institution that should have valued and protected her. Even after all these years, Spencer has never softened his criticism or walked back his statements. He has remained consistent in his belief that the royal family failed Diana both in life and in death. His frustration with how her funeral was handled, particularly the decision to make William and Harry walk behind her coffin, remained a source of anger for him. He had argued against it, been overruled, and then watched helplessly as two children were put through an experience he considered traumatic and unnecessary. Years later, when Harry finally spoke publicly about that walk, he confirmed what Spencer had feared. The experience had indeed been traumatic. Harry described it as something no child should ever have to endure. He admitted that it had affected him deeply and that the memory of that day haunted him for years afterward. William, too, later commented that by modern standards of child welfare, such a thing would never be allowed to happen. Spencer's vindication on this point came too late to change what had occurred, but it reinforced his broader argument about the royal family's failures. They had made a decision that put protocol and public spectacle ahead of the well-being of two grieving children. For Spencer, this was emblematic of everything wrong with the institution. Appearances mattered more than people. Tradition trumped common sense. And the emotional needs of individuals were secondary to the perceived requirements of the monarchy. The story Spencer had been telling for years about how the institution failed, Diana began to take on new relevance when similar patterns started emerging in the life of Diana's younger son. Harry had grown up with memories of his mother that shaped his entire worldview. He remembered her warmth, her rebellious streak, and her discomfort with royal constraints. He also remembered how she was treated, how the press hounded her, and how alone she had seemed at times. As Harry grew into adulthood, he began to recognize uncomfortable parallels between his mother's experience and his own. The same media that had chased Diana now followed him relentlessly. Every relationship he had was scrutinized and judged. His private moments were captured and sold, and despite being born into the royal family, he felt many of the same pressures and constraints that had made his mother so unhappy. These feelings intensified dramatically when Harry met and married Meghan Markle. Almost immediately, Meghan faced hostile media coverage that Harry found disturbingly familiar. Negative stories appeared regularly in tabloids. Her every action was criticized. Rumors and false stories circulated constantly. And according to Harry, she received inadequate support from within the royal institution itself, just as Diana had. Harry later described watching history repeat itself and feeling helpless to stop it. He saw his wife struggling in ways that reminded him of his mother's struggles. He saw the same lack of protection, the same media-feeding frenzy, the same institutional indifference. The trauma of losing Diana in the way he had, combined with the fear of losing Meghan to similar circumstances, became unbearable for him. In 2020, Harry made a decision that stunned the royal family and the world. He and Meghan announced they were stepping back from their roles as senior royals. They would be moving to North America, seeking financial independence and fundamentally changing their relationship with the institution. It was the most dramatic break any royal had made in modern times, and it sent shockwaves through the British establishment. For Harry, the decision was not about rebellion or rejection of his family. It was about survival. He had seen what the system did to his mother, and he refused to let it happen again. In interviews following the move, he spoke emotionally about recognizing the patterns and feeling he had no choice but to remove himself and his family from the situation. Unlike Diana, who had tried to find freedom but remained trapped in many ways, Harry had the option to physically leave, and he took it. The move was controversial and divisive. Some people admired Harry for prioritizing his family's well-being over tradition and duty. Others felt he had abandoned his responsibilities and let down the institution and the country. The debate was fierce and often bitter, revealing deep divisions about what the monarchy should be and how it should function in the modern world. Charles Spencer, who had spent decades criticizing the very system Harry was now walking away from, understood the decision better than most. While Spencer did not make many public statements about Harry's departure, it was clear that he recognized the courage it took to break free from such a powerful institution. Spencer had fought to protect Diana and had been unable to change the system that harmed her. Now Harry was taking the action that his mother had perhaps wanted to take, but never fully could. In leaving the royal family, Harry was in many ways finishing what Diana had started. In her final years, Diana had been carving out a new identity separate from her royal role. She had been redefining what it meant to be a public figure who used their platform for good without being constrained by palace protocols. She had been showing that a person could be effective and beloved without formal titles or official positions. Her death interrupted that journey, but Harry was now continuing it. The parallels between mother and son were striking. Both had struggled within the royal system. Both had tried to maintain their authenticity in an environment that demanded conformity. Both had faced relentless media attention that made normal life impossible. And both had ultimately sought freedom from the constraints that made them unhappy, though Diana's quest was cut tragically short. Spencer's role in this ongoing story remained significant even decades after Diana's death. His willingness to speak honestly about what happened to his sister helped keep important questions alive. He refused to let Diana's story be sanitized or her struggles minimized. By continuing to criticize the institution that he believed had failed her, he ensured that the lessons from her life and death remained relevant. When Harry finally took the step of leaving, he was validating much of what Spencer had been saying for years. The institution could be harmful to those within it. The demands it placed on individuals could be unreasonable and damaging. The protection it offered was sometimes inadequate or non-existent, and sometimes the bravest and healthiest choice was to walk away. The story that began with Diana's death in 1997 thus continued to unfold in new and unexpected ways. Spencer had fought to protect Diana and then to protect her memory. Harry had lived with the consequences of her loss and eventually fought to protect his own family from similar harm. Together, their actions challenged the royal institution to confront uncomfortable truths about how it treated the people within it and whether it was capable of real change.